Hello everyone, welcome to this joint webinar from the ICBE Advanced Productivity, ICBE Business Excellence, Galway Executive, Takes for Success and Aviation SkillNet Learning Networks. Today our presenters are Professor Mark Brown and Associate Professor Mairéad Mhichíl from the National Institute of Digital Learning at Dublin City University. Director of NIDL, Professor Mark Brown's main research areas are the societal and economic benefits of lifelong learning and continuing education, and new models of online and blended education. Mark is Treasurer and Executive Committee member of the European Distance and E-Learning Network and serves on the Supervisory Board of the European Association of Distance Teaching Universities. In 2020, Mark became a member of the European Commission's expert group for the development of a European framework for micro-credentials. Dr. Mairéad Mhichíl is currently an Associate Professor and Senior Research Fellow with NIDL, researching massive open online courses and implementing the university's strategic initiative in this area. She is a Fulbright Scholar with the University of Notre Dame in the USA and a lecturer in information technology in the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences in DCU. Today's topic area is Certifying Your Future, Making Sense of Micro-Credentials. Over the course of 30 minutes, Mark and Mairéad will explain what is meant by micro-credentials, why we should be paying attention to them, in addition to outlining some of the latest developments in this area and ways to get involved. Ground rules for today: Mark and Mairéad will present for approximately 15 to 20 minutes before opening up to questions and joint exploration. This means we'll have more scope today to explore areas of interest to you and to hear your own experiences. Everyone is muted, but we really do encourage you to use your webcams and submit questions or comments via the chat function. If you wish to ask a question, please unmute yourself, call out the presenter's name, followed by your own and your comment or question. This will stop us talking over each other. If you encounter problems with broadband, please bear with us as we may need to pause the camera. This session is being recorded. And without further delay, I'll pass you over to Professor Mark Brown.
Well, thank you very much, Owen, for that introduction. And I'm going to be handing over to Mairéad at a point in the talk today. And thanks to everyone for joining us. It's interesting to see here we are in the middle of July and we've still managed to draw a crowd. Not everyone is away on summer holidays. Well, not too many places to go, I guess. Without further ado, just to give you a sense of what we want to cover, Owen's given you a little bit of it, but we've structured the talk into three sections. Micro-credentials are one of the big movements in education right now. So we want to help explain a little bit more about what they are, why we might focus on them, and then Mairéad's going to talk more specifically around how might Ireland respond to this global micro-credentialing movement. So that's the general format of what's to come. But before we go too much further, we thought it might be just useful to see who we've got and your own knowledge. So if you would like to answer the poll here, we'll give you a little bit of time to do so. Tell us about your own knowledge or your own understanding of micro-credentials. How would you rate yourself?
Right, kind of a mixed set of responses, and I shared. I'll just give it one more minute for almost up at everyone answering.
We've tried to keep it as simple as possible for you with just three answers there. Well, it's interesting and probably what I sort of predicted. We have a self-selected audience in many respects. You're here at a session talking about micro-credentials, so probably you've heard a little bit, but there's not a lot of understanding generally, and you're not on your own, so no shame in that. So that was a useful exercise to get us underway. I don't think what we've got to come will be completely off the mark. Before we do go any further, I will just sort of give you a key takeaway. And it's almost a bit of a slogan, I'm embarrassed to say, but I think it still holds water. Irrespective of the context, whether you have someone we know here with a higher education focus, many others coming from industry, different parts of business, that ultimately sustainability is important in anything we do. And our interest in particular around micro-credentials is how they might advance big ideas for the future. They're not the big idea itself. And there is a risk at the moment that too much attention is being paid to the micro-credential per se, or badges even, without really connecting it up with what we might want to achieve. So that's a takeaway right up front from us. So having set the scene, let's have an effort here at trying to help articulate a little bit more about the micro-credential movement, and more specifically, what are micro-credentials? I referred to badges previously, and it's fair to say that, yes, micro-credentials kind of have one of their origins in the badging movement, and some of you may have been guides or scouts collecting badges over the time. And this sort of history might not necessarily endear the movement to all, because the evidence around the badge might not be that easy to locate. And I certainly don't have my scout shirt anymore with badges on it. And then another reason why the term badging in particular tends to polarize people is that badging comes very much out of the gaming movement. And the gaming movement itself is quite not necessarily fully inclusive, shall we say, and there are issues around transfer of learning from one game to the next, or from a game to the learning context that might be more real world. So it's not unproblematic is what we're starting, and that's the two, I guess, slides I've shown around the badging aspect. The takeaway is it's not unproblematic. To elaborate even further on why it's not unproblematic, and now I've shifted the language from badging to micro-credentials, here's a survey that the European Commission recently did amongst people who are working in the area of micro-credentialing or around the area in qualification agencies, where we asked these various definitions of what we might think micro-credentials are, and you can see very little, well, no standout. Yes, one tended to get 65% of responses, but that's not a confidence endearing response in the sense that we are all talking the same language. And in fact, that is, again, one of the takeaways here is that not only in a European context and an Irish context, but globally, there is no accepted definition of micro-credentials. Last year, Owen, I think, referred to when we hosted the World Conference on Online Learning, one of the keynotes, Professor Beverly Oliver, talked about her work, and she's one of the leading scholars in this movement. And so we've pulled out a definition from a report she published last year that is a little bit more accessible than some definitions, but even this definition is very broad and doesn't necessarily help us unpack what we really mean by micro-credentials. Nonetheless, as you'll hear from Mairéad, Deakin University has really been leading down under in this work, and DCU has quite a strong relationship with Deakin. One of the key takeaways from Beverly's work when Deakin first introduced what some might call badges was, don't call them badges. That's a quote unquote from Beverly. So I'm going to try to give you a very simplistic outline of what this movement might be about. But again, I'm doing this in a somewhat artificial way, but three types just to help you kind of concretize or create a framework in your mind. The first type is very much focused on stackable, credit-bearing qualifications. You can see them almost on an x-axis, vertically, promoting lifelong learning and drawing on formal and non-formal sorts of courses leading to assessment that then leads to some credential of some kind, of micro-credential. You could even argue following this that actually micro-credentials have been around for quite some time. A postgraduate certificate in a university is a micro-credential of a master's. But that perhaps underestimates the more disruptive aspect to what micro-credentialing could be. So the second type of micro-credential, I'm going to mix metaphors here, and this is more on the y-axis, if you're trying to create this image in your mind horizontally, like a honeycomb where learners fill the gaps in their knowledge. Now, these gaps may not be entirely focused on vocational outcomes, work, they may be just out of their own interest, as a life-wide learner, tending to focus more on informal and non-formal learning opportunities. So those are the sort of two, the X and the Y axis, just to try to put this into simple language. But actually, as I've already said, it's not simple. You can add here, if you like, visually a diagonal line across, where some micro-credentials actually from industry themselves, some professional bodies, you'll see I have badges there from EY and Microsoft. These tend to cut across both of those two axes. They do nonetheless tend to be more non-formal, and I'll introduce the term semi-formal here as learning experiences. But again, there is usually assessment and some form of quality assurance. And those are two key words in terms of trying to make sense of micro-credentials as distinct from just more general badges for attending a conference or an event, if you like. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense of the landscape, but I'm going to represent that in a visual here, where what we can say is that everyone is fairly aware of, in this four-quadrant ecology of the credential ecology, we've got formally accredited degrees. Now I'm going to populate it on the axes of bundled versus unbundled, credit-bearing versus non-credit-bearing, with this distinction here. But this is, again, a reasonably artificial distinction. I think it's helpful because what it does is make a really clear differentiation between micro-credentials and non-formal and informal badges that have no credit bearing. It's fair to say that the work that's going on with the European Commission is very much more focused on credit-bearing, quality-assured, trusted micro-credentials as distinct from informal badges and even non-formal badges. So on that note, I've given you a little bit of an overview, taken probably a little longer than I anticipated, so I'll go through this next section quite quickly. There hasn't been anything come up yet, I see, in the chat box, but if you've got questions, comments, or want to even challenge anything I've said, by all means do post something, because we'll have time certainly at the end for picking up on those. So why a focus on them? Well, there are actually a number of drivers and also attractors, if you like, because right now, Mairéad will share this with you in Australia. One of the attractors is actually the COVID-19 response to the COVID-19 crisis, but I won't get ahead of myself. More generally, drivers, firstly, we shouldn't underestimate the MOOC movement. The language micromasters, nano degrees, actually Class Central, which is an aggregator that monitors MOOCs. This slide comes from back in February, I think it was, where they did their annual analysis. They identified 820 different micro-credentials already on the various MOOC platforms. Of course, the takeaway, though, I've given you lots of takeaways, probably too many, is that there was no consistency in definition or language across those micro-credentials. So again, the landscape is very muddled or a little murky in terms of what we are really referring to. Another driver that we should not underestimate is really linked to the changing nature of work. The report that I'm sharing here with this survey comes from the States, but we often hear in the popular literature that university qualifications don't have the same standing as they once did because they're not preparing work-ready graduates. The gap between the skills of today and what higher education institutions are still preparing for the 20th century versus the 21st century. Sometimes that's not always well empirically grounded. Even the argument that 65% of the jobs won't exist in the future doesn't have a strong empirical basis. But nonetheless, we won't deny that work is changing rapidly. And so there is a need for continued upskilling. And I'm being a little bit pragmatic here and just selecting some of these drivers. There are many more because only a week or so ago, in fact, on the 1st of July, the European Commission launched its new European Skills Agenda for Jobs. This links also into its response to the COVID-19 crisis. But what's really important about the European Skills Agenda, and I invite you to go and look at that if you haven't already, is of the 12 actions outlined in the European Skills Agenda, which then also links into actions that have funding. Action 10 is to develop a European approach to micro-credentials. And so that's the work that we're really engaged in right now. And I think, as I said, I think earlier, this work is around how we can incorporate micro-credentials as being defined, and you'll hear that in due course, into, in particular, the European qualification framework, which many local countries then align their national frameworks with as well. So that's really going to, I think, help not only in Europe give a lot more structure and understanding to what we are talking about, but actually we shouldn't underestimate the impact that a common definition across Europe will have globally as well. So on that note, I think it's time to hand over to Mairéad. I hope I've left you enough time, Mairéad. And we'll do a little poll in the transition. So your show now.
So how are we getting on, Owen? How's the poll going?
Oh, it's zipping up. Yeah, it's quite split actually. I'll just give it another 2, 3 or 4 seconds.
I'll just mute myself here and hand over.
I'll share the poll with you now.
Okay, very interesting. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about those results in terms of what we have from how important digital badges during the recruitment process. So this question was asked of the QQI in Ireland, asked this question of recruiters across all sectors. Back in 2018 actually, but it was published in 2019. And basically what it's, the respondents came back and said they weren't important at all. So we can see that in the last year and a half, there's been a little shift just between, you know, your own responses and what came out in the QQI survey. But interestingly enough, in that same survey, it was also said that over half of the respondents wanted to find out more about micro-credentials and digital badges in particular. So if we move on, I suppose how I want to look at more than anything else is how well positioned Ireland can respond to this movement and what we can do. Looking internationally, I think, you know, if we look at the Australian marketplace and we look at what they're up to, because Australia seems to be a little bit further ahead with, than us in this, is that they have announced a one-stop shop or a marketplace for a micro-credential platform for all micro-credentials to go up there. So they've taken the initiative, the bull by the horns, and they've done that because of some of the questions and issues that come into play, which I'll talk about in subsequent slides. I want to recognise some of the work that's already been done as well in this space, and that's, you know, back in late 2019, UCC and Taste for Success, when the skill nets there, they had worked through a digital badging process, and UCC have done quite a bit of work in this. They use their own platform, Canvas, to deliver out digital badges, but we're progressing more, as Mark has talked about there, you know, before, where we're looking beyond what we would call, say, moving into the first 3 quadrants there that Mark had showed you, where we're moving beyond warm body badges. So what had happened up for a long time was that people would be given badges because they were new, etc. They were given badges just for attending events, but maybe the important words that Mark was saying was the notion of this assessment. So they would be assessed and given by a valued or trusted stakeholder. If we look from the NFQ in Ireland, we should, as the National Framework of Qualifications, which is aligned to the EFQ, we know that in those first 3 quadrants, really, we already are very well positioned because we have sort of set out various vehicles by which we can slot micro-credentials into. So there can be smaller versions of what our current major awards are. They can be special purpose awards, or they can be supplemental awards. So we already have a lot of the architecture, particularly for those credit-bearing assessed micro-credentials that we want to give out. And I think, as we know from Mark's work with the Commission, is that the Commission is sort of going down that route as well. And the reason why they're going down that route is really because a lot of the universities, working with the variety of MOOC platforms, want to bring structure and they want to bring credibility into the process. And up here on this slide, you can see DCU's own first micro-credential. Actually, it was the first micro-credential to be delivered out on the Future Learn platform, which has over 10 million learners enrolled in it. And we delivered out a micro-credential in fintech. So we started that out in January of this year, and its second iteration will be out in October the 5th. And just to give you some notions, if you look at that screen, it's 12 weeks long, it's for a certain amount of time, and it's the level there. We say distinctly what level it's at. So we're trying to be very, very clear with the learners and for employers who want to maybe send their employees onto this. We're trying to be very clear about the level it's at, who it's pitched at, what are the learning outcomes, what should they be able to do, etc. And it's a very organized piece. Looking at the Future Learn, so Future Learn has launched quite a number of micro-credentials, and if you go through there, you can see, you have Open University in the UK, Queensland University of Technology, you've Deakin University, which has Mark has said, led out on a huge amount of the work in this area, and they've co-created by Griffith University. I think the co-created bit is a really, really important thing to take away from this, because micro-credentials, one of their focus is they're there for the upskilling within sectors, but also the this notion of being able to move across sectors and to provide. Can you just go back up one slide there, Mark? So the co-creation part of it there is really, really looking at the universities, and particularly their notion is that they work with industry to develop really focused learning outcomes, that they develop competencies and skills that are very much required in industry. And I think that's the really important bit. And I know for a lot of people who are HR managers or recruiters, it's really, really important to understand what are the key competencies and learnings that people have done as part of the recruitment process, so that when you're looking at CVs that come in and they potentially have these micro-credentials on them, you'll know that by going to and verifying and looking at potentially some of the major MOOC platforms, you'll be able to see how they've been constructed and what the sort of standardization that's been happening with them. Sorry, thanks, Mark. So with the ECIU is part of this European University initiative that DCU is part of, and part of this is working out through a major micro-credentialing initiative across partners to look at how best we can develop out micro-credentials and leverage each other's expertise in a variety of disciplines, and they're all linked to SDG 11. We've done a lot of work on this area to work out a lot of the issues around accessibility, portability, credibility, and interaction between the various universities. And for that, because a lot of the learners who gather micro-credentials, they need somewhere to be able to demonstrate the learning that they have. So therefore, the platforms by which that host these are really, really important. So how do you publish that you've achieved a micro-credential? And when we talk about this, it's the learner who owns, at the end of the day, the qualification. So you look at there's a variety of platforms that are coming to the fore that allow learners to do that, and also are working in tandem with universities all across the country. Digitrain is an example of one. It's a platform by which a lot of the universities in Australia work with, and Canada has recently announced a combined university contract with Digitree, which learners who have done micro-credentials with them will be able to publish. That's where it will be the central portal by which they will publish out the micro-credentials that they have. Another one that is pretty common in the market is the Credly's Acclaim platform. And again, it does similar things, but again, it's all about providing this trust. And when we use you'll potentially see a lot of the things that come out of this. It's the notion of trust. So who's provided the learning, who's validated the learning, etc. And it's again to move away from that warm body notion of I attended a conference, so therefore I sat through a lecture or whatever. It's that assess piece that's really, really important. Of course, the European Union, not to be outdone, is looking at Europass. The Europass portfolio of learning, which is really to provide each member or each citizen of the EU with the ability to upload their own learning within this European network, so that you can upload your learning, your qualifications, the informal and formal learning opportunities. So therefore providing some sort of aggregated version, but also a trusted version. The work that is going on with Europass is also going on with those other major platforms, such as Digitree and such as Credly, etc. And it's really, really important. So we're going to see Europass was relaunched in the last few weeks, And we're going to see how it has developed out to provide citizens in the EU with the ability to publish and to collect in one single place all of their learning achievements, etc. As part of, I suppose, one of the major gaps that we found in the marketplace was really understanding what employers and employees need, because at the end of the day, you know, we as institutions, higher education institutions, we understand the importance of the qualifications we give out. You all know what, you know, masters and undergrads and certs and all that higher education and other institutions of learning to give out. But we really want to see what you need from micro-credentials. What is the gap in the market? So in partnership with the 5 SkillNet networks, we're working on this national micro-credential survey, which is being launched today. And we really want to get back from employers and employees, their needs and their requirements, because it's a massive gap. So what do you need? We know that from the research that really micro-credentials are addressing another important thing that Mark didn't refer to, and that's work-life balance. You know, where people need to upskill, they need to enter into a new position or a new role as their role evolves, but they maybe don't have the time to invest in a full master's program or a full upskilling program, but they need very set amount of skills. So that's why our micro-credentials are used to fill that gap. Ourselves in the National Institute of Digital Learning in Dublin City University, we've been keeping a very keen eye on this, and we've been keeping an eye on it globally. And what we've done together here is we've put together all of the reports, all of the sort of the new thinking on this and the developments as they happen. And I think it's really important, because I don't know, on interview boards, I think for the last 2 weeks I've sat on quite a number of them, both internally within the university, but also externally. And it's becoming very clear, even from my cursory and sort of experience, that what's happening is that more and more people are doing this, and a lot of them are doing that particularly in response to COVID, where they know that they may need to enter into new markets and into new work areas. So I'm going to leave you on that. It was a hopefully whirlwind enough. So Gurmila Mahagwiv, and I think hopefully there are some chat questions, and we'll get to them now, Owen.
Thank you very much, Mairéad. That's a lot for you now. I'm sure you would normally spend an hour or two trying to explain half of that. Could you just talk to us a little bit about how, because a lot of people on the call maybe in recruitment or HR departments, what is that physically going to look like when they get CVs in? Is it that there will be a link to the badges that people have, or will it be, how will it physically manifest itself? What would people expect from a recruitment point of view when they're looking at potential candidates?
So if I understand your question properly, I think what is happening is that a lot of people will have put down that they have done maybe courses where on a lot of the MOOC platforms where the certificate of completion is what they receive, and they receive the certificate of completion if they do it at the complete X number of steps or X number of participation. What the difference between where the European Commission is going and also where, you know, I think that the Irish sector is going as well, is that it has to be very much validated learning, that it has to be assessed learning. And I think that's really important. So if I was a recruiter looking at this, I think it's really important to look at the notion of where has the learning come from and what it's addressing. So if you know, and I think that's why the universities that have got involved in the micro-credentialing movement, and that's is really looking at providing the structure for this and providing some sort of validation and recognition, so that recruiters don't get into the position where they need to go and, you know, Google every last micro-credential that they can have, when it's a trusted provider that they can understand and recognize the quality from that.
Great. So it'll probably, people will have a link to their own portfolio that will list
their own portfolio. Exactly. They'll have a link to their own portfolio. They'll be able to do that. And also this ties in this notion, which is moving all the time, of the self-sovereign identity, where learners will be, you know, that they'll be their own little portals of where they'll keep out, and they'll be able to provide that link out to a recruiter and an employer, and the recruiter will be able to go in and see these verified qualifications or credentials there. And that's the importance of having those major platforms such as Digitree and Credly all becoming integrated, and it's really necessary. So there's a huge amount of, as Mark said, there's a huge number of players in this market. But what we're seeing now is this sort of shakeout happening. And it's really, really important that that shakeout happens, because I think between that we're going to work out on really valuable standards that are going to give people comfort, I think.
Right. Sorry, there's a link to our question around other sectors that have done something similar. So in software, open source credits with an individual with a summary of the impact of the contributions globally. Stack Overview is one of several aggregators that verify an individual's skills. How do micro-credentials align with the Stack Overview and other similar type movements?
Well, I'll come in on that note, because it also links to a follow-up question that I see there, is that what Mairéad was establishing is the importance of interoperability and system integration. So there are quite a number of open badging platforms, including most of the VLEs, Moodle and Canvas can issue badges. But the question, that follow-up question there, is around the stackability, and then how you deal with historical qualifications, and whether you have to surrender, for example. So if you stack a badge, or I'll use the language micro-credential, to something that's of a higher qualification, do you have to surrender the previous qualification? In some instances, you do have to do that with university level qualifications. So what that tells us is that there needs to be quite a sophisticated back end that keeps a record of this. Now, many people have heard about the blockchain being one of the solutions. The Netherlands has had a very interesting project where they have built a countrywide platform for micro-credentials on a blockchain system. But that's still very immature. And in the case of DCU, Digitree, which is one of the most credible platforms already. In fact, all of Australian and New Zealand universities, as Mairéad was indicating, use Digitree. And as she also indicated, Canada has just taken Digitree as their platform. That's very recent news. So what you're going to probably see is a couple of major platforms emerge. But equally, those platforms need to integrate into the Europass in a European context, because the Commission very much sees that Europass will be the one-stop portal. So that was a kind of very rushed answer to the issue of platforms and systems.
Yeah, because there's another follow-up question, which is quite pragmatic, and it's, would there be value in a national decision on a particular platform, like what you've referenced in Australia or Canada? Is there likely to be one contender, or will we be living in a world of cohabitation with many different platforms?
Yeah, for me, I think though it's part of this notion of interoperability and setting the standards. So whether it's on one platform or the other, that you have set out sort of a very clear standards and very clear things that can be set from one platform to the next. I think the way that Australia has gone down the road, and I think the way the Canadians have gone down the road, it makes sense, because what you're doing is you're saying, okay, we're going to be very, very clear from the start. I think in one way for us, and we then, those decisions are going to be really, really important for us, because, you know, we have a huge notion of migration out from into those territories itself. So like that's going to play an important part in whatever that, because they've already taken that first step, or they've taken sort of the initial jump off. That's going to influence the national, I think the national response as well. What we've been doing, and I know that other institutions have been as well, is that we've been sort of trying to, as best that we can, ensure that QQI and the HEA, etc., are all very much aware of what's going on, so that they're going to make, or they're going to come out of this and really, really be part of it. And I think the work that we're doing in the European Commission is sort of, we've been sort of coming at it from bottom up. I think that top down is going to give us a lot of structure as well, because otherwise it's as we've seen, it could be, you know, the wild, wild west. And that's not going to help anybody at the end of the day, particularly for employees who want to move on, etc. And I'm looking at some of the badging initiatives that have happened in industry. Sometimes one of the major limitations for them is they may be recognized by a large corporation, etc., but then having to move into another or smaller SME or whatever, that's not always available, and that has to be renegotiated. So I think if we can get to a point where the standards are worked out, I think it's going to be very, very useful to everybody.
Thanks very much, Mairéad. Can I just ask, we've spoken a little bit about, the implications for people in terms of recruitment, and I imagine the implications for, especially within HR, for learning and development, that this will have quite a big impact as well there. Could you speak to us just about the impact you can see it having on, internal learning development, the selection of courses that they send people on, the course that people will be requesting, and what people should do in order to prepare themselves for it?
Well, I think it's going to be a little different for different sectors, but just to give the Irish Law Society a little bit of a plug, that what they're doing, where there is a requirement for continuing professional development on an annual basis, that by linking into some sort of micro-credential that can not only verify and ensure that it's been appropriately assessed, but in addition, the next step that you would expect is then a link into some formal credential that might be in partnership with a higher education institution, a university or another similar body. Other entities that are going down this path with discussions where maybe that CPD that they're doing might not be a micro-credential in itself, but actually is fitted and put together into a portfolio that's assessed, because again, some professions require that. Veterinary medicine is one, for example. So I think we're going to see different solutions, different options for different sectors, but ultimately there needs to be some common standards, as Mairéad has said. And what we have at the moment that gives us confidence and trust is a framework that lays out those standards in our national qualification framework and European one, and similar quality assurance processes, because it has to be confidence and trust.
Yeah, and I think just on a point that I was trying to make during the presentation, and I probably rushed through it, I think is just that the co-construction with industry is really, really important. And I think all of the HEIs are so aware of this. We have been, and some of us are better than others, that we may have more industry partnerships, or we may link into particular, disciplinary areas, etc. And I know that's happened, and it's happened really well with UCC and Taste for Success and some of the brewing stuff that's gone on there, and that's brilliant. And I think that's the model that I know not only the HEIs want to get into, because then it's more demand led, that we know that we're developing out courses with industry, co-constructed, and in some ways we're even talking about co-delivered. And I think that's going to build out. And I think for higher education institutes, that's really, really important, but it's very, very important though also for industry as well, because that we're not just doing that, we're delivering on the needs that are required for industry, but also from the employees. We know that the micro-credential platforms and the platforms supporting these, whether it's FutureLearn, whether it's edX, Coursera, or any one of those, we know a lot of them have done a huge amount of market analysis. They've done a huge amount of this, where they're looking at what is coming through from their learners. They're saying, well, we need this or we need that, and they know they're surveying, they're engaging with their learners quite a bit to understand their requirements. And this is on a global basis, with millions and millions. So it's not just something that's that's happening at a European level, or this is on a global basis, where we know that some of the biggest drivers are just the personal drivers, particularly in the Western world, where there's lots of difficulties in and around access, just getting time to do higher education, to upskill, and etc. So I think in that way, I think it's been a really, really important time, so that we can design more niche and more focused courses with industry, and for employees. There was a question I wanted to get to, Owen, that I saw come up in the chat.
Yes, the masters.
Yeah, and I think in one way
Actually, my call out question, just in case people didn't see it. So do you see any concern from the academic side of things, impact on numbers signing up for master's programs?
Well, I think one of there's a number, like from the academic side of things, I think that's why, most of the universities that haven't got involved in this space are looking at it from the notion of, we have provided accredited learning. That's our business. That's what we do. So we're very much about protecting our quality assurance processes that we go through to make sure what we deliver out is to the highest standards possible. So therefore, I really don't see that. I know in DCU's case, we went through a very structured and, I suppose, developmental process when we went to go in and look at how we were going to develop out the FinTech math micro-credential and how that would feed in. And the stackability issue was really, really important for us as well in that, so that if we had learners on this, that they could build out and do it. And if they wanted to just hold it as a single micro-credential, that's fine, that they could do that as well. So I think from the academic side of it, you know, we're always going to be sort of there. I don't think that's an issue for us. The issue that we see is that it can address, and particularly in a COVID-19 non-travel situation, don't mind about but looking for us from an internationalization point of view as well, because we're very much aware, you know, DCU has had to cancel a lot of our Erasmus programs that we would have where our students would go out internationally, and that's both for you know, placements within HEIs, but also for work placements as well. So we're seeing this as potential that we can potentially do virtual internationalization and do those linkages in as well, so that you have more of not just only local cohorts undertaking this learning, but also maybe international cohorts. And I think that diversification of a student base is also really, really important.
Thanks, Mary. We have two final questions if people were able to hold on a little bit longer. An interesting one, and it's kind of related to the cost. So do you have any idea the costs involved to develop micro-credentials, or who be footing the bill for developing them?
It depends on what you're developing and how you're developing it. You know, like, I suppose a lot of these things, you know, if you're trying to do it to the standard that you wanted to do it, it's going to cost more. It's not going to cost less. You know, one of the misnomers is that education online will be cheaper, when we actually know that it's not, because actually we work out a huge amount of the issues that we would normally do in a face-to-face situation all have to be engaged with and worked around, particularly for online or blended learning. So the cost issue really depends on what you want to build out and how you want to build out, and it really depends also on some of the disciplinary areas. So if you're looking at lab-based or trying to replicate how that type of learning, that could become very costly very, very soon, particularly if you're doing simulations, scenario-based learning, all of that type of thing. And how much, you know, because we know for us, for online learning, and this is from our own perspectives, a wider perspective, the National Institute of Digital Learning is like that. You're trying to not only get people, you're trying to engage them, you're trying to make sure that the learning experience isn't just me talking down the pipe at you. It's you engaged in activities, learning activities, that you're trying to bring all good pedagogical approaches to that. So there's various versions, and I won't call out any of the platforms that are currently doing online learning, which we would not call online learning. We would just call that, you know, presentation slides, people talking over. That's not learning, that's just transmission-based information. So, you know, I think it has to be really, there's lots of factors that you have to take into account. Some of the best things, we're all aware, you know, if I want to know how to do something on my Premiere Pro or whatever, I'll go and I'll Google certain amount of things and I might find a quick fix, but we're not talking about quick fixes or learning how to navigate. We're talking about deeper learning opportunities for skills and for competency to be developed. So the cost issue is, it's like, it depends what you want really.
Yeah, and I imagine the cost from industry is their participation in helping to co-create some of these as well. Could you talk about micro-credential badges as used to recognise student extracurricular activities such as society officers or voluntary experience? What would that look like?
Well, I'll come in just to change the voice for a minute. And I just posted a few responses there in the chat to some of the comments that have come up. This is where it's really important to make a differentiation between badges, because, you know, a badge is just a name, and what sits behind that, and what we are really leaning strongly towards in terms of micro-credentials is verified, trusted, and assessed activities of learning. So there are certainly plenty of examples. Perhaps I prefer to call it the co-curricular than the extracurricular. And we all recognise that learning takes place outside of the classroom just as much as it does inside the classroom, and that's valued. So this is not to undermine in any way those co-curricular learning experiences. But ultimately, Just participating in something, as we've said previously, doesn't really mean a lot. It might be something you put on your LinkedIn page initially if you haven't got much else. But what we think really will have status and value, and we need to be thinking more than just Ireland here, because people are going to be operating globally. It has to be trusted. It has to be recognized. Right in the COVID-19 crisis, a lot of literature has emerged around contract cheating. So we have to know the person who has the badge. Well, I'll again not use the word badge, who has the credential, whether that be a micro-credential or not, is the person who's claiming it. All of that needs a trusted system, and a system that works across national boundaries.
Thank you very much, Mark. And it leads into the nice segue into the wrapping up of this session. So as Mark and Mairéad mentioned, the Irish National Survey of Micro-Credentials is aimed at helping to better understand both current and future opportunities, and it will be used to inform our research projects. So your participation is greatly appreciated. This research is jointly sponsored by the Aviation, ICBE Advanced Productivity, ICBE Business Excellence, Galway Executive, and Taste for Success SkillNet Networks. And finally, many thanks to Professor Mark Brown and Associate Professor Mairéad Giolla Mhichíl from the National Institute of Digital Learning at DCU for all of your insights. And thank you very much to everyone who attended the webinar today. And we look forward to seeing your participation, if possible, in the survey. And that survey is launched today. The slides and the video from today will be available on the networks later on. And I think Gráinne will be sending around the link to everyone to participate in that survey. So thank you very much, Mairéad, and thank you very much, Mark, and thank you to everyone who participated today.
Thanks, everyone.